He was always just my husband's friend. Until the night he stayed too long, said too little, and looked at me like he'd never looked at anyone else. My name is Laura. I'm 50. Most days, I don't feel 50. I feel unseen, or overly seen. Like someone who's been around too long to be mysterious, but not long enough to be forgotten completely. I exist in the corners of grocery stores and dentist offices and PTA meetings, even though our son is already grown and gone. People smile at me because they're supposed to. I smile back because I've forgotten how not to. Mark and I have been married for 22 years. Long enough to stop finishing each other's sentences, but not long enough to stop expecting we still might. We sleep on opposite sides of the bed now. He reads crime novels on a Kindle with the font too big, and I scroll through recipes I'll never try. We don't argue. We don't kiss goodbye. We exist near each other. It's a soft sort of distance. The kind that doesn't make headlines. The kind you can mistake for peace if you're not looking too closely. And Paul, well, Paul has always been part of the background. They met in college. Mark and Paul. Instant friends, the kind that had inside jokes by the third day. Paul was the best man at our wedding. Gave a terrible speech, if I'm honest, full of sports metaphors and half-funny jabs that made my mother frown. But he cried at the end. That's what I remember. A man who couldn't quite say what he felt until it leaked out of him anyway. Over the years, Paul was always there. For every move. Every broken pipe. Every grill that refused to light. He brought wine to every dinner, even if it was store-brand Merlot. He knew when our anniversary was, though I doubt he remembered his own parents' birthdays. He never settled. Always moving. Always between things. I once joked that Paul had lived more lives than any of us had vacation days. And then, last month, Mark invited him to stay for a while. Just a few nights, he said. His new place is still being finished. Renovation delays or something. I nodded. Said sure, because it wasn't a big deal. Not really. Paul had stayed with us before. For a night. A weekend. A stopover between states or situations. He was easy. Grateful. Harmless. I didn't even bother to clear out the guest room entirely. Just swapped out the sheets and lit one of those candles that smell like expensive soap. When he arrived, I was still in the kitchen, rinsing lettuce. Mark called out, "She's in here," and I turned with wet hands and a damp dish towel across my shoulder. Paul stepped into the room like he had 20 years ago, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, a grin already stretching across his face. He had aged, of course. We all had. His hair was grayer than I remembered, and there was something slower in the way he moved, like time had softened his joints. But his eyes were the same. That part surprised me. There was something startling about being looked at with the same eyes that once saw you in a bridesmaid's dress and now saw you holding a colander. He hugged me. Warm, casual. Not too long. "Thanks for having me," he said, voice low and familiar. "Of course," I replied. "It's not like we're strangers." He laughed at that, a small sound, genuine, and brushed a strand of hair behind his ear. A habit I realized I hadn't seen in years, but still recognized instantly. That night, we ate outside. Mark grilled. I made a salad. Paul brought wine again, this time something French and unpronounceable. He apologized for the bottle like it was an ex-girlfriend. Too bold, a bit dry, but impossible to forget. We laughed more than usual that night. Mark had a second glass of wine, then a third. The stories got older, the laughter louder. I refilled the water pitcher twice, added more ice, watched the condensation run down the glass like something alive. At one point, Paul looked at me from across the table and said, "You haven't changed." I raised an eyebrow. "I've changed." He shook his head. "Not in the ways that matter." Mark didn't hear. Or if he did, he didn't comment. He was telling a story about the time he and Paul got lost hiking in college. Again. I smiled, said nothing, but the words lingered. Not in the ways that matter. That first night, everything was still normal. Predictable. Mark went to bed first, half laughing, half mumbling something about early meetings. Paul and I cleared the table. He insisted on washing dishes. I dried, leaned against the counter, watching his hands move through soap and glass. I never pictured you domestic, I teased. He glanced over his shoulder. I'm full of surprises. Yeah? I smirked. Name one. He didn't answer right away. Just handed me a wine glass, then another. When he finally did speak, his voice was quieter. You always do that. I looked up. Do what? Take care of people who don't see you anymore. The silence that followed didn't feel like discomfort. It felt like being seen. Not admired. Not desired. Just recognized. I placed the glass down too carefully. Turned to leave the kitchen. Good night, Paul, I said. Night, Laura. But something in his voice had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe I just finally heard it. The second day was ordinary. I made coffee before anyone else woke up. Sat on the back steps in my robe, watching the sun inch its way across the grass. Mark left early, a meeting that couldn't be moved. Paul wandered into the kitchen later, barefoot, scratching his head like a teenager. You always up this early? He asked, pouring himself coffee. Have it, I said. Old women wake up with the birds. He chuckled. You're not old. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We moved around each other like planets with shared gravity. Close, but not touching. He complimented the coffee. I pretended not to care. That afternoon, I found him in the garage, fixing the lawn mower. You don't have to do that, I said from the doorway. He didn't look up. I know. Later, I baked a pie. I don't know why. I haven't baked in months. But something about the scent, cinnamon, heat, sugar, made the house feel more real. Mark called to say he'd be late. Paul and I ate dinner without him. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. When I went upstairs that night, I passed the guest room and heard music playing softly, something old, bluesy, slow. I paused outside his door. Not long, just enough to recognize the melody. Then I kept walking. By the third night, I felt it in my skin, a quiet awareness. Not attraction, exactly. Not yet. Just a kind of alertness. Like standing in a room full of lit candles, knowing any one of them could tip and catch fire. Mark fell asleep on the couch. Wine again. A game on TV. I found Paul in the kitchen, reading something on his phone. Blanket? I asked, holding one out. He looked up. Met my eyes. Didn't take it. That pause, God. That pause. You always do that, he said again. Do what? His gaze didn't waver. Take care of people who stopped noticing you. And I didn't know what to say. Not because I disagreed, but because I'd never heard it said aloud before. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. Soft, but deep. Like water over stones. I placed the blanket on the arm of the chair. Good night, Paul, I said, voice almost steady. He didn't answer. Or maybe he did. Maybe the absence of words was the answer. At the foot of the stairs, I stopped. I don't know why. I stood there, heartbeat loud in my ears, trying not to turn around. Behind me, I heard him move, a shift in weight, a breath. Not toward me. Not away. Just there. Like me. Still. In bed that night, I lay on my side, staring at the wall. Mark snored softly, one arm sprawled over the edge of the mattress. My hands were cold, my mouth dry, and my mind. It was no longer quiet. It spun and circled, returned to that look. That pause. That space between something and nothing. I hadn't crossed a line. but I had found the edge. And once you find it, you can't pretend it isn't there. It wasn't what he said. It was how quiet everything got after. The next morning, I dropped a spoon. It wasn't a big deal. Just one of those small, silly things, hand too tired, mind elsewhere. The clatter against the kitchen tile was louder than it needed to be. I bent to pick it up, and when I straightened, Paul was already in the doorway. He looked at me, then at the spoon in my hand, and said nothing. But something passed between us, not a look, not quite. More like a shared breath that neither of us knew what to do with. I placed the spoon in the sink. Mark walked in a moment later, yawning, rubbing his eyes. "Smells like coffee," he mumbled, walking past both of us like we were scenery. We were. That was the part one hadn't noticed before. How invisible I'd become, not out of cruelty, but habit. Mark kissed my cheek as he left for work. It was automatic. I felt nothing. I don't think he did either. Paul stayed in the kitchen, leaning against the counter. His arms were crossed, eyes on the window, but I could feel them flick to me now and then. Quick, barely their glances. I poured more coffee. My hand trembled slightly, not enough to notice, but enough to know. "I'm going for a walk," I said. "Okay." But when I stepped out, I heard the back door open too. His footsteps followed. We didn't walk side by side. Not really. But we weren't separate either. Like two shadows trying not to overlap. It was a quiet neighborhood. Familiar. Boring, even. But that morning, it felt new. The sky was overcast. The trees were still. And I could hear everything, the birds, the wind, even the faint creak of Paul's boots on the sidewalk. "Sorry about last night," he said after a while. I didn't look at him. For what? He shrugged. "Just in case." I could have said it was fine. That nothing happened. That he hadn't crossed a line. But I didn't, because something had. Something always does. It's never the words. It's the silence that follows. That evening, Mark fell asleep again on the couch. Third time in as many nights. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, the way his mouth stayed slightly open, like he'd forgotten he was alive and needed reminding. I covered him with the same blanket, the one Paul hadn't taken. Then I stood in the hallway, unsure where to go. Paul was upstairs. I wasn't going to his room. That wasn't even a question. But still, I didn't go to mine right away either. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, hand on the railing, frozen. I could hear him walking, not pacing, just existing above me. The sound of a drawer, the rustle of fabric, a single cough, and then nothing. Stillness. I climbed the stairs and passed his room quickly, not looking in. But my chest was tight, my breath short. In my bedroom, I changed into my usual pajamas, nothing fancy, nothing flattering. Just cotton and old threads. But when I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see sleep. I saw someone trying to remember how to forget. I didn't sleep much. I lay in the dark, the weight of the sheets unfamiliar, listening to every creak in the house. My mind wouldn't stop. Not about what had happened, but about what hadn't. The next day was worse. Because now everything small felt magnified. He handed me a dish towel while I washed up. Our fingers touched lightly, briefly. But I felt it all the way down to my spine. I turned to ask him something and found him already looking at me. He looked away. I did too. But not fast enough. That night, it happened. Not in the way people mean. But something did. Mark had gone to bed early. Not drunk, just tired. A long week. Paul and I ended up on the back porch. It was warm, too warm for late September. I held a glass of water with both hands like it might anchor me. He sat 2 chairs over. Not close. But not far enough. We didn't talk much. I made a comment about the stars. He said he used to know their names. Then we lapsed into quiet again. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you ever feel like you stopped existing, but your body kept showing up anyway?" I didn't answer. Because yes, every day. He looked at me, and I knew he wasn't asking for comfort. He was giving me permission. To feel, to remember, to want. I stood up. Too quickly. Said I was tired. He nodded. Didn't stop me. Didn't say anything at all. But just as I opened the door to go back inside, he said quietly, "You deserve more than being invisible, Laura." I didn't turn around, but I closed my eyes and stayed there just for a second longer than I should have. I don't know what time it was when I went back downstairs. It wasn't planned. I woke up suddenly. The house was dark. Mark still breathing softly beside me. Something in me was pulsing. Not desire. Not exactly. Just an ache. A need to be known. I told myself I was just getting water. That it was harmless. But I knew. The kitchen light was off, but there was a glow from the hallway. Paul. He was standing by the open back door, looking out into the yard. He turned when he heard me. Said nothing. Neither did I. I walked in. Slowly. Heart in my throat. We stood there, not close, not touching. But everything between us was loud. "I couldn't sleep," I said. He didn't move. Me either. I stepped forward. Not far. Just enough. "I shouldn't be here," I said. His breath caught. "You already are." I don't know who moved first. I really don't. But suddenly he was close, too close, and I didn't step back. His hand lifted slowly and touched my cheek. Barely. I should have stopped him. I should have pulled away. But instead, I leaned in. Just slightly. Just enough. And his mouth found mine. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even long. But it broke something. It broke everything. We pulled apart like we'd been burned. Stared at each other in the dark. He whispered, "I'm sorry." I shook my head. "No," I said. "You're not." I went upstairs. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my sleeping husband. I watched the rise and fall of his breath. And I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. It wasn't the kiss that changed me. It was how badly I wanted it. How badly I still wanted it. During the day, I was a wife. At night, I was a silence I didn't know how to hold. I didn't confess. Not to Mark. Not to myself. I woke up the next morning, made the coffee, folded the blanket from the couch, wiped down the counters like I hadn't stood in the dark kitchen hours before, and let another man's breath melt into mine. Paul didn't mention it either. We moved around each other like careful dancers, all edges and near misses. His voice was light. Mine was lighter. We joked about the weather, about the wine, about nothing. But underneath the air was a hum, low, sharp, dangerous. Mark remained oblivious. That's what hurt the most, maybe. Not that I'd kissed Paul, but that I could have kissed a stranger in the grocery store and my husband wouldn't have noticed the change in my face. There's a kind of grief in that, being so gently ignored. I started lying, not with words, but in the soft nods, the overcompensating smiles, the way I let my hand linger on Mark's shoulder while passing behind him, like an actress rehearsing intimacy. I convinced myself it was for the best, that Paul would leave soon, that it would pass like a fever, that I could file it away under mistakes and misfires, burn the memory before it became something flammable. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want it to pass. Paul didn't press. He never reached for me again. Never brought it up. But every glance, every too long pause, every moment of silence held the echo of that kiss. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found him reading. A simple moment. He looked up, and in that look, I felt my whole body tighten. He didn't smile. I didn't breathe. It lasted only seconds, but it was enough to hollow me out again. Mark asked me one night if everything was okay. I was stirring sauce on the stove, wooden spoon in my hand like a weapon. The question surprised me. Of course, I said too quickly. He kissed my temple. I nearly flinched. At night, I lay awake. Not out of guilt, not even out of desire. It was something else, a tension, a vibration just under the skin. I would think of Paul, not the kiss, but his voice, his restraint, the way he said my name in the quiet. I imagined what it would be like if we had no names at all, if no one belonged to anyone, and we could meet in the middle of some unnamed field and simply exist without the weight of history pressing on our backs. But morning always came, with coffee, with toast, with small talk. And I was Laura again, Mark's wife, efficient, calm, safe. Then came the day Paul asked. We were in the driveway. Mark had just driven off. I was holding a bag of groceries, keys in my mouth, and Paul reached to take the bag from my hands. His fingers brushed mine. We both paused. And then he said, "Laura, what are we doing?" I stared at him. "I don't know," I said. "Nothing. We're not doing anything." "That's the lie," he said. "It's not nothing. And you know it." I shook my head, not in denial, just trying to shake off the ache. I can't. Can't what? This. Whatever this is. I can't want it. But you do. I turned away. Because I did. That night, I put on makeup before bed. I told Mark it was for a video call with a friend, some nonsense I mumbled while brushing powder over the ache in my face. He didn't question it. I looked in the mirror. Lipstick. Mascara. A woman in costume. A woman pretending to be whole. Paul found me the next evening on the porch. Mark was working late. The sky was the color of old bruises. "You keep disappearing," he said. I shrugged. "Busy?" "No, you're not." I looked at him, and something in me cracked. "I'm married," I whispered. "I know. He's good to me." "Is he?" I opened my mouth, closed it. Paul stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Just enough to make me forget how to stand. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "Then why are you still here?" "Because I don't want to be your shadow." My heart stuttered. "I didn't ask you to be." "No. But you let me." That night, I looked at Mark while he slept and realized I hadn't really looked at him in years. His mouth opened slightly, his chest rising and falling, his hand resting close to mine. I tried to remember the last time we held each other just to hold. I tried to remember the last time I felt something that wasn't obligation. I couldn't. Paul left 2 days later. He packed quietly. No announcement. Just a message left on the kitchen table. "Thanks again. Let me know when you're ready to stop disappearing." I read it 3 times, then folded it into the back of my recipe book. I told Mark I missed Paul around the house. He smiled. "Yeah, he's always good company." He kissed my cheek and turned back to his emails. I went to the bathroom, closed the door, sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the floor. My chest was tight, my eyes dry. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. But in the mirror, my reflection looked unfamiliar. Not older, not younger, just not mine. I came back, but not as who I was. The house felt quieter after Paul left. Not in the way absence usually echoes, but in the way still water makes you realize how loud your own heartbeat is. Mark didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't say. He kept talking about work, about refinancing the mortgage, about the neighbor's new dog. I nodded in all the right places, smiled where it was required. But I was somewhere else entirely. Not with Paul. Not exactly. With the version of myself that had been awake in his presence. That self had shape, hunger, breath. She didn't apologize before she spoke. She didn't wait for permission to feel. I didn't hear from him for a while. No texts, no call. Just a silence that didn't feel like abandonment, more like an invitation. To decide. To breathe. To choose. One morning, weeks later, I found a postcard in the mailbox. No return address. No message. Just a photo of a beach, empty, overcast. The kind that doesn't ask you to be happy, just to be present. In the corner, tiny handwriting. Not a goodbye. A door. I stared at it until the light changed around me. Then I tucked it into the same cookbook where his note still lived, folded and slightly worn. The next day, I woke before Mark. The sky was a pale bruise. I made tea, opened the windows, sat on the floor like I used to when I was young and angry and didn't yet know what for. I touched the floor with my palms, breathed in, held it, let it go. I thought letting him go would feel like loss. It didn't. It felt like returning a borrowed name. One I had whispered in the dark but never called out loud. I didn't want more from him. I didn't want promises. I wanted to know I existed in someone's eyes without explanation. And now I did. Mark asked if I wanted to go away for the weekend. A cabin. Just us. I hesitated, then said yes. Not because I thought it would fix anything, but because I needed to know if there was still something there to salvage. At the cabin, he tried. He brought me tea without asking, rubbed my shoulders while I cooked, asked if I was okay. I said I was. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the full truth. We sat on the porch in silence one afternoon, leaves rustling like whispers we couldn't quite hear. He said, "You've been far away lately." I didn't answer, just placed my hand over his. Warm, familiar, and slightly misplaced. That night we were close. In the way married people sometimes are, quiet, careful, practiced. He kissed me. I responded, but inside, I wasn't reaching. I was remembering. Not the kiss with Paul, but the version of me that leaned into it. That knew she could still be chosen, not assigned. Back home, life resumed. Laundry, groceries, the ache in my hip on rainy days. But I moved differently. I picked my clothes more carefully, not to attract, but to feel. Fabrics that held me close. Colors I used to love before I forgot I was allowed to have favorites. I put on perfume before errands. Wore earrings to the store. Not for anyone. Just for the echo of a self I had almost let vanish. One night, I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't look for flaws. I didn't fix anything. I simply stood and waited until I saw her, the woman I had become. Quiet, clear, not healed, but whole. Paul was never the story. He was the light switch, the struck match, the open window. He reminded me that longing is not betrayal, that hunger is not shame, that being seen is not indulgence, it is survival. He didn't come back. He didn't need to. I came back. To my life. To my husband. To myself. Not the same. Never the same. But more me than I had ever been. I still make coffee every morning. Mark still kisses my cheek. But some mornings, I watch the light fall across the table and think, that was the moment. That night. That breath. That silence. And I smile. Because I didn't fall. I woke up.